Welcome back. I'm Dan Handelman. This is part 2 of the Flying Focus Video Collective's coronavirus version of the Busiversary, a program to review the shows we produced over the last year for the weekly Flying Focus Video Bus. We're producing this episode while being socially distanced.
And I'm PC Perry. Flying Focus continues to prioritize content over style as we cover topics not normally seen from the people's perspective, including war and peace, race relations, police accountability, economic justice, and the environment.
The Busiversary marks 29 years since the first episode of the Video Bus aired in November 1991. Since we started, we've created a catalog of nearly 1,000 programs featuring speakers, forums, protests, and interviews.
If you want to join us, write down this contact information. Our phone numbers are 503-239-7456 and 503-321-5051, which also works for texting.
Or you can email us at ffbc@flyingfocus.org. To volunteer with us or become a supporter, contact Flying Focus using this info. Part 2 of the Busiversary continues now with Barb introducing clips from more of her shows produced between November 2019 and October 2020.
It's Barb Greene who did the editing. I did the camera work, and we're talking this time 3 episodes about climate control. Barb, what do you remember?
Right, we've been doing quite a few programs about the environment recently, because if we don't do something now about this crisis, all of this is going to be gone. We won't have clean air, water, food, and we're all going to look like this.
Oh!
So the first one is a climate crisis panel, which consists of city, county, and state representatives. And it's very interesting to hear what they've been doing, because sometimes it feels like they're not doing anything at all.
The true story is not really survival of the fittest, it's more survival of the most cooperative. And that's what we need to be. And for centuries, that's what our species was. We were all indigenous to somewhere, living in harmony with the species around us. And this mindset of colonization has now driven us to the point of extinction.
I am part of a council that talks out of both sides of its mouth. And so, for example, we passed a resolution that said we would be energy independent by 2050, and yet we're planning to spend $500 million expanding the freeway.
Asian and Pacific Islander communities are incredibly diverse, culturally, linguistically, and geographically. But one of the things in my role at Apano that I've realized is this actually is something that weighs upon all of us, our community members, our staff, because we do feel it so acutely, the risk to our families, whether they live in the Pacific Islands, in China, in Taiwan, in Bangladesh. The risks there from storms, typhoons, hurricanes, heat waves, and sea level rise are being felt right now.
There are very few people who show up ever before our state agency budget hearings. There will be a ton of corporate lobbyists there who are paid to sit there in a room and help advocate for their clients, and maybe 3 organizations that are large enough. So our big ones like OLCB, OEC, who have capacity to send one person down to Salem who's trying to speak on behalf of dozens of organizations. There's just not a lot of capacity. So I'd encourage you to lean in on the budget side of things.
We did partner with the city in passing the 100 by 50 resolution that's saying all of our energy by 2050 was going to come from renewable sources. And I hate to say it, that includes your gas cooking stove, it includes the car that you're driving, it includes a lot of things that are going to be really uncomfortable for all of us. But this is where we have to come together and show that we are truly committed to making this happen.
We're talking now about the Zenith 5 testimony with Deke Gundersen. I guess I was the pool photographer, that's videographer, and that was getting it out to the rest of the people who could not be at the camera. Barb, what did you see from what I sent you?
Well, this is another really interesting program Deke Gundersen is a climate scientist, and his testimony helped get the Zenith 5 off based on what's happening with the climate, which was, I think, the first time that that's ever happened in this country.
Very good. I think that was a hung jury, but we'll take it.
Yep.
We were able to have a pretty good idea of what CO2 levels have been over the last 800,000 years, and as you can see from the top left chart, they haven't been above 300 part per billion until fairly recently. And then you can see how that line sort of goes straight up, and this is this exponential growth that I talked about that is a little bit worrying. So again, it's showing what the parts per million or the concentration of carbon dioxide has been in the atmosphere back in time to the present date. And again, it shows that for most of, we know for the past 800 years, it hasn't been above 300 part per million. Now it changes so much I have trouble keeping track of it, but we're somewhere at about 410 part per million now. So that's why you see that line sort of shooting up. And again, that also shows that carbon dioxide levels have been rising at an exponential rate. What I tell students about understanding exponential growth, let's say you have a test tube and I put a single bacterium in the test tube, and it's 11 o'clock, and the bacteria can divide every minute. So after 1 minute it would be 2, after 2 minutes it would be 4, after 3 minutes it would be 8, so on and so forth. And at 12 o'clock, the tube is full of bacteria. And so the question is, at what time would the tube be half full? And some students stare at each other, and then finally a couple raise their hand and they go, 11:59? And I go, yeah, that's right, because it's doubling. So at 11:59, this tube is only going to be half full. At 12 o'clock, it's going to be completely full. The better question is, when would you realize you're running out of space? And this is why I'm so concerned about climate change and exponential growth, is that when will we realize that we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? And I hope it's not at 11:59, because then it's kind of too late.
Nicholas Caleb for the Zenith 5 trial was giving testimony next, and his footage is coming up after Barb tells us what the content was.
Nicholas Caleb is an attorney, so this is a very interesting perspective on what's happening with the climate. And he describes here for the jury how our system has been set up so that corporations, politicians, the entire system has been set up to get profits to the rich at the expense of people and the climate. Very interesting stuff.
Great. Let's look at the footage now.
Why won't corporations like Zenith or Chevron reduce their impacts on our communities and try to steward health and the environment as part of the work that they do?
Except in a very, very small class of companies that are legally allowed to. The vast majority of companies, especially publicly traded companies like many fossil fuels, have a direct duty to their investors to maximize profit, and they believe that the best way to maximize profit is to increase the amount of product that they sell in the market, which is their rational interest. And there is no legal way that they can go against their investors' interests in our system. In fact, their shareholders would sue them if they tried to do it.
And so their shareholders require them to put their own short-term profits ahead of our health, our environment, the survival of the planet.
Yes, that's accurate.
And who are, I know it varies, but generally speaking, who are these shareholders?
Shareholders, theoretically anybody could be a shareholder, but in point of fact that are people that are able to afford the shares. And for large companies like fossil fuel companies like Exxon or Chevron, they're some of the largest and most profitable companies on the planet, and their shares are expensive. And so largely they're, you could say, people that are in the investor class who have the type of money where you could purchase a fair amount of shares of those companies.
So is it fair to say that very rich people are profiting off of killing the planet?
Yes.
And that is allowed, or you're saying that's a legal requirement right now under our system?
Yes.
Are you aware of how much time we have to get CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases to an acceptable level to prevent some of the worst harms of climate change?
Yes.
How long is that?
We have to cut our emissions basically as a society in half by about 9.5 years from now.
Hi again, I'm still Dan Handelman, here now to talk about a show that merged the issue of climate change with issues of war and peace. It features a panel discussion I organized with the group Peace and Justice Work. It was recorded by PC last November. The panelists include radio personality Teresa Mitchell, who also hosted, covering the US's many ongoing wars, Cody Urban of Code Pink, specifically linking the issues of war and climate, Sahar Muranovich, an Iranian American, talking about the US's long conflict with her country of origin, and Dan Shea of Veterans for Peace, talking about the current efforts by the US to provoke war with Venezuela. It's really important to make the connection between militarism and the changing climate, especially since so many wars are fought to control the flow of oil, which is then used to fuel the aircraft, Navy vessels, and land vehicles to conduct those wars, which leads to more carbon in the atmosphere, and on it goes. For more information, you can see this whole show and over 30 of our full-length shows streaming online at youtube.com/flyingfocusshow.
We, the people of the United States, harbor and tolerate a violent regime that stands for the privileges and profits of the great corporations. That means defending the polluting mines and factories and oil fields from Afghanistan to the Philippines, from Riyadh to Seoul. It means that when the nights are no longer cool enough to stop a fungal blight on your coffee crop in El Salvador, you're going to face a U.S.-trained war machine for 1,000 miles if you try to find a new place for your family to survive.
Who knows what who the number one polluter is in the world? Yes, the U.S. military is the number one polluter. Would it surprise y'all to hear that the U.S. military pollutes on average more than 140 countries combined? Just the U.S. military. The U.S. military is also the number one emitter of carbon emissions. The Pentagon is fueling not only weapons technology around the world, but it's powering over 560,000 facilities around the world through those carbon emissions.
This administration has surrounded itself with the very same people that were part of the warmongers during George W. Bush's time, how we got into Iraq, how we got into Afghanistan. And these very same people are in those positions of power again, beating the drums of war. And none of this has to do with human rights or democracy or any of that. As you mentioned earlier, we don't even pretend it is that way anymore. We're just looking for resources. It's about money and power. It's about greed. It's about getting more and more resources from the global South.
Being a Vietnam veteran, it's not new. It's the continuous pattern that's happened over and over again. Sanctions, these false flags that they put up to blame and demonize those various people in various countries that they decide that they are going to either disrupt, take over, usually for oil or other resources. So that's something to always keep in mind. Venezuela, do they really care about the democracy and the plight of the people in Venezuela? If we look at the plight of people here in the U.S., you'd have to say no.
Next are clips from another War and Peace show featuring another event coordinated by Peace and Justice Works, along with about 30 other groups. In July 2019, when COVID was not an issue, about 200 Portlanders came together to protest the U.S.'s looming wars against Iran and Venezuela, which thankfully did not yet come to pass. PC was able to record most of the speakers and some of the march. You'll hear from Olivia Kathy Smith of Portland DSA, Candy Herrera of Hands Off Venezuela PDX, journalist Arun Gupta, activist Antonio Zamora, and community organizer Marco Mejia. They covered topics of imperialism, climate, immigration, and more. This one show in many ways ties back to the earliest concept of Flying Focus, which is to connect all these issues together. Sahar, who spoke at the Climate and War Forum, is also featured on the full program.
So we are mobilizing today in solidarity with the people of Venezuela and Iran, as well as the people of Palestine, in the Philippines, in Honduras, Nicaragua, and every other place the empire has tried to exploit for their own wealth and domination and control. We know that they are not waging war and endless violence for the sake of it. They are doing it because there is a tangible benefit.
We need to build a movement where we understand what is going on in this country, what is really attracting people to the military, and that's how we beat it, right? By offering them something new, something better, something different, by offering them a world in where we can all live securely, but where we can all have meaning, not this disgusting militaristic violence system we have now. Thank you.
60% of Venezuela is black and brown, and 60% of Venezuela also identifies as socialist. So in the words of Workers' World Party Secretary Larry Holmes, speaking at the 1-month anniversary of US's last failed coup, every time an oppressed people try to take control of their destiny, it is akin to a slave revolt. And those who think they are the rulers of this world forever cannot allow that, and they will do anything to stop it.
Governments across the world spend trillions of dollars on military budgets and wars every year. Instead, as humanity, we should be building a new ecological society together. Instead of death and destruction, we should use creativity and cooperation.
We're so good dreamers, you know, we dream and this and that and unity, we dream and liberation, we dream. Yeah, we should keep dreaming, but also we should keep waking up every time and resisting, right? So that unity, we build it every day with a mindset that is embracing of the diversity of our movement.
Sorry about that. Stop the wars! Stop the wars now! 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 Stop the wars! Stop the wars now!
Yet another Peace and Justice Works event was presented on YouTube via Zoom in June and featured Professor Zahir Wahab, an African-American who looked at what he called the fateful partnership between the US and Afghanistan. Dr. Wahab spent most of the 18 years of the US occupation, including full-time in the 6 years before he returned in 2019, in his native country. This show was hosted by radio personality Ani Raven Haynes. The original event ran 90 minutes, and I appreciated the chance to cut it down to 2 half-hour episodes of the video bus, adding graphics and other enhancements that weren't part of the original show, for which I ran the technical end of things. Here, Dr. Wahab described a few ways in which the US war has not accomplished anything to benefit the Afghan people.
Militarily, the situation is described by American generals actually as either a stalemate or a war lost. It is being said repeatedly that Afghanistan, the Afghan war is the third defeat for the United States, Vietnam and Iraq being the other two. This is the third sort of defeat. There are some 16 to 20,000 fighting soldiers with a lot of air power. The reason we don't hear about American casualties is that their number have been reduced, American and NATO, I should say. But also the invading forces have resorted to air power, airplanes and drones. Khalilzad has been talking to, first he was talking to the Taliban about just the troop withdrawal. You know, Trump is on record not liking this war. He tells us, you know, and would like to end it, and he calls it Obama's war and other people's war. Khalilzad approached him and he was given this task, and Khalilzad had first, for months and months, he was talking to the Taliban about the American troop withdrawal and how that can be accomplished. And then leaving the Afghans and the Afghan government completely out of the picture. Finally, the Afghan government, Dr. Ghani, got very angry, saying, you know, you're undermining us and you're undermining in a way the US presence. The Americans have committed a major, not the American central government has committed a major crime, I would say, of the century, and continues to do so. And the Americans have wrecked a country because, as I said, I shouldn't be sitting here, but I should be sitting where I was born and raised. But the American presence and its allies have made Afghanistan unlivable in every way possible. And so they are responsible now to see it fixed. But you know, you don't fix the country by bombing it to the Stone Age.
Though it took a while to get to it, I also edited together a video I recorded at the 2019 Hiroshima Nagasaki Memorial event at Waterfront Park. The 2020 event had to be presented entirely online, making the outdoor setting for this show a bit nostalgic. 2019 marked 74 years since the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and as usual, Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility put together a varied program, this time focusing on the unequal impact of nuclear weapons. You'll hear from host Kurt Hakita, Michiko Kornhauser Hibakisha, who's a survivor of the bomb in Hiroshima, her singing group, the Ikoi no Kai House Band, Hanford Downwinder Pat Hoover, Representative Earl Blumenauer, and John Edbo, a Native American artist who plays the song on his drum.
74 years after the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the atomic bomb, we Portlanders, Oregonians, gather here today with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility to memorialize the lives lost on August 6th, 1945.
Suddenly we noticed that something was flying over us, and before we knew it, we were seeing something falling all over us. Soon we are covered with grayish ash. The teachers shouted, "Go and run to the river and wash yourselves." So we ran to the river, only to find the river was also covered with the ash. That night, teacher told us that a huge bomb fell over Hiroshima and the entire city was wiped out.
The women who became pregnant hoping to start a family, and time after time there were miscarriages and spontaneous abortions. If the baby was carried to term, there would be birth defects, horrendous birth defects. I have so many stories of women who carried 5 children to term and they all died.
We are, as a country, investing $25 billion a year on weapons that we really can't afford and we can't afford to use.
This song is going to talk about we're going to be coming through this earth as strong, united people.
Thank you for joining us in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic to commemorate the 29 years of Flying Focus on the 29th Busiversary.
While it's more difficult to get out in person, we continue to provide information on our shows about how you can help create positive social change.
If you want to volunteer with and or help support Flying Focus in any way, call 503-239-7456 or 503-321-5051, which also receives text messages. You can email Flying Focus at ffbc@flyingfocus.org.
All 28 of our past Busiversaries and dozens of our other shows are streaming on the web at flyingfocus.org. The Flying Focus Video Bus airs every week in the same time slot. Set a video recorder or tune in live on cable or streaming on Mondays and Wednesdays for our regular programs. We can't see you, but we hope you'll see us next time.